It's Wednesday, December 6th. Please join us for the discussion of Louis Malle's Au Revoir Les Enfants.
Or if it's easier for you, Goodbye Children, which the title from the title of the movie comes from the last line in the movie, actually, which is spoken by the principal, the priest of this Catholic school, as he's being taken off to turns out to be Mauthausen, where he dies. And the setting that is at a French Catholic school in 1944. And this movie by Louis Malle is very much an autobiographical film. The story of these boys is a story that he remembers from his own childhood. Louis Malle not Jewish. He is one of the Catholic boys at the school, but he remembers this time and this incident where the priest running the school hid essentially three Jewish boys under the guise of them being Catholics and going to this Catholic school and trying to save their lives. And unfortunately, as in the story of Anne Frank that we watched, they were betrayed, and all three of those boys ended up dying at Auschwitz. And again, like Anne Frank, they're not deported until 1944, and it's really only a matter of weeks before the end of the war. So a tragic story in that sense. The priest who died at Mauthausen, I think, actually dies a day or two after it's liberated, but is so sick and emaciated already by that point that he died there.
In the Wikipedia of Louis Malle, he said that they say that it was his close friend, but a Jewish teacher, was rounded up, which is not depicted in the movie.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean it talks only about the boys.
Yeah.
I will say that Louis Malle in interviews and things like in articles about this, he said that it's autobiographical. He also said there was some fictionalizing to it. I mean, I think there's some things that I would say there's some discrepancies in what Louis Malle said about it himself, actually. But mostly it's a movie of his memory. And so there was a small genre, if you like, of French films in this time period at the end of the 20th century that dealt with this. I mean, I think they are, in a way, an attempt for these filmmakers to deal with a sense of national guilt and shame, right, of how France treated its Jews, unlike some countries that, of course, refused, even though they were under Nazi occupation, Nazi rule. Places like Morocco, which was a French colony, and so taken over by the Vichy government as well. But the Moroccans refused to export their Jews to Germany, right? So France could have provided more resistance, certainly, than they did. And so there is a long-standing streak of anti-Semitism in France, in the French Republic. We worry that it's rearing its ugly head as it is in America, in France today. There are some differences, I'd say, and some of them are worth thinking about and talking about. The biggest one is the French attitude towards religion in general is different than the American attitude towards religion. And as it was explained to me by a French rabbi, the difference is that in America, we talk about freedom of religion, and in France, they talk about freedom from religion. And it may not seem like a huge difference, but it is. In France, there's a lot, not just about anti-Semitism, but of course anti-Islamic behavior in France as well. And part of it is that there is this sort of sense in France that it's okay to have religion, but don't show it. Don't let anybody else know, right? So there's a lot in the French media and stuff about banning the hijab in France, right? So that's an anti-Islamic thing. But my rabbi friends in France say it's also not okay to wear a kippah in public, not because of anti-Semitism, but because it's not French to do that, right? So he wears a hat when he's out in public, but not his kippah. His kippah is only for synagogue, right? And that other French Jews, traditional and not so traditional, tend to not wear their accoutrement of Judaism out in public, but disguise it with a regular looking hat, even a baseball cap, whatever. And that this doesn't have so much to do with, as been explained to me, with anti-Semitism as much as a kind of an anti-religious issue. And it's the same for, they don't like Catholics with big crosses, they don't, anything public is an affront. And some of
They
this,
they don't like lederhosen.
yeah. So anything real, that brands you as your religion is, I find myself slipping into French terms here, gauche, right? It's not the thing you do in France. And so we sometimes conflate, I think, this sort of French national character, which comes, of course, from being a country that was dominated by the church for a long period of time. So the French Revolution and the various counter-revolutions and the different French republics, a big part of what they had to do was throw the church out of the government, right? And so that's why I said that, we in America live in a country that never really established a state religion. And France has a history of state religion that they had to destroy, essentially. So it's a bit off topic to go there, but it's an interesting thing about. But it does lead into avenues of anti-Semitism for sure, and so there is this kind of they may not feel it now as they did in the 1980s in going to the turning toward the 21st century, but this sort of national shame of how France treated its Jews in the late 1930s and 40s. So so there are a few French films from this time period that talk about this, and all of them, I would say, do the same thing that this does, which is take this sort of national shame and make it personal. And so there is a sense of the boy who befriends the main Jewish character in this movie clearly feels a sense of shame for what he's done. And so very interesting document, and a director who Louis Malle comes kind of out of the French New Wave cinema that really appeared after World War II, 1950s and 60s, guys like Francois Truffaut and Jean-Luc Godard and a handful of others. Those are perhaps the best known in America. But so he's a contemporary of all those guys. He was born in 1932, died pretty young, actually. He died in 1995. His first movie was a documentary that won an Oscar for Best Documentary. It was called The Silent World. And he was the co-director with Jacques Cousteau of one of the first kind of undersea documentaries. So that was 1956, I think. It won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival, and it won the Oscar for Best Documentary. And he continued to make movies, a couple of which were nominated for Best Foreign Film, including this one. But the one that sort of put him on the American map was a movie called La Comme Lucienne, which was nominated for Best Foreign Film at the Oscars. Um, uh, this movie was not only nominated for Best Foreign Film, it was nominated in the category of Best Screenplay, which is not quite as unusual today as it was back in the 1980s, but pretty rare for a foreign film to get a Best Screenplay nomination. And that was actually the second time he was nominated for Best Screenplay. A movie he made called Murmur of the Heart was also nominated for Best Screenplay at the Oscars. So, but La Comme Lucienne and Murmur of the Heart that got him noticed in Hollywood. He came to America and made a few movies here in the United States. So he's probably best known for directing the movie Pretty Baby with Brooke Shields, and Atlantic City with Susan Sarandon, and I think I want to say Burt Lancaster, I think was in that movie. So both interesting works that were probably works of their time, not so much, I'm not sure either one of them is a movie that you would enjoy watching today. Actually,
It was Burt Lancaster, and he also dated Susan Sarandon.
Louis Malle did.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So, yeah. So for a period of time before she met Tim Robbins, right, who's been her partner for decades now.
They broke up.
Yeah, I think that's over.
So over.
Is it?
You're done. Yeah.
Really interesting. He actually directed a movie in 1958 called The Lovers, a French film. And it's probably most interesting today as being it was shut down at a theater in the United States, and the owner of the theater was accused of disseminating obscenity. And so this was the very famous obscenity trial that went all the way to the Supreme Court in the late 1950s. And the Justice Potter Stewart is the one who the court decided in favor of the theater owner and said that the movie was not pornographic, but they declined to define what pornography is. And this is the famed quote from Justice Potter Stewart saying, "I know it when I see it."
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes.
So, things about redeeming social importance and other kinds of things. So those we were talking last week about 1959 and the story of Anne Frank and what that might have looked like. It had been made 10 years later. This movie, The Lovers, is really one of the ones that sort of paves the path for opening the doors of movie theaters to more challenging, more graphic, more realistic material. So an interesting little sidelight connecting these two films. For me, of course, they connect primarily because they're both stories of children, teens in peril in relation to the Holocaust. They are similar of children being hidden and the betrayal that comes in both of these movies. So that's the obvious sort of connections for me about it. It is different in a lot of ways. Of course, it's in color, but stylistically, some of the things that we talked about in the Diary of Anne Frank, I think you can see here too. The composition within the scenes, even the framing of characters and window frames that we talked about last week. We see some of this in the Louis Malle film too. I know that most of you, maybe all of you, didn't get a chance to see it, but there are some very beautiful compositions in this as well. It's I would rate it higher on the realism scale, perhaps, than There is a lot of sort of casual anti-Semitism, which I think is also a very sort of French characteristic. You know, that you know, people at the same time say, well, I have nothing against the Jews, but yeah, but they don't really understand Jews. They don't know anything about Jews. When he asks his older brother, our main character, asks his older brother, what are Jews? He says, well, they don't eat pork, right? And why?
But the other thing, I think it was the brother who says, and they killed Christ. And
right. Well, so that's why do people hate them? You can't hate them just because they don't eat pork, right? Because they're smarter than us and they killed Jesus, right? Is what he says.
Right, but the Julian says, wasn't it the Romans? I mean, that kid was smart.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he is right.
Yeah.
He's precocious. He's smart.
Yeah.
There's a lot of sort of, the movie doesn't go out of its way to tell us up front that here are these Jewish boys. They're just new students, right? We're introduced to them just as new students, and they're teased and beaten and a variety of things because they're new students, not because they're Jews, right? It's the only, other than the priests, the only people who actually know, the only one who actually knows that this boy is Jewish is Julian, because he's a snoop, right? And he looked, he woke up one night and saw him actually saying prayers and lighting Sabbath candles. He goes through his belongings and finds his real name. But really, it's a secret to all the other boys. They mistreat each other constantly because they're teenage boys in a Catholic school. So this guy kind of, on the one hand, they're treated like everybody else, miserably. And then it's not till the end, really, that all the boys in the school know that there have been Jews among them for this whole school term. Sue?
Yeah, thank you, Rabbi. One of the things that struck me in this film was the kids were basically fearless. Mm-hmm. They really weren't afraid of anything. When the only thing they were afraid of were the German and the French officers and the German officers. That's what they were afraid of. They weren't afraid of, I mean, when you think about how they were running through the forest and the rocks they were climbing on, and I mean, it looked like daredevilish stuff. And they just weren't afraid of any of that. They weren't afraid of when they'd get into fights or when they were on the stilts and they'd poke each other, and nothing frightened them except the Germans and the French Vichy.
Yeah. Well, and they hated the French Vichy, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's very clear how much they think those guys are collaborators and they're a problem. This is 1944, remember? I mean, so it's not early in the war. It's, at this point where nobody, there's a specific mention of the head of the Vichy government, what's his name, Pétain, right? And nobody likes him, right? I mean, they just say that out loud. Nobody's in favor of him anymore, so you're right. And even the relationship with the German soldiers, there's some fear, especially among the younger boys, but the older brother takes delight in giving them bad directions. Mm-hmm. They have, and believes he can get away with it, right? So unlike a lot of sort of Holocaust movies, I think, Schindler's List we watched, right? I'm, absolute fear of the Nazis. It's really not until the Gestapo shows up near the end of the movie that there's any real fear even of them, right? The boys are a little afraid when they get lost in the forest and get picked up by, and at this point, we know there's a Jewish boy in the car, and the boy who knows there's a Jewish boy in the car, the two who are in the back seat, as the Nazis are driving them back to Catholic school, right? So there is a kind of, again, as we talked about in some other movies, as film goers, there's a sense of um, suspense because we know what's going on there. But the German soldiers who are driving the back think they've got two Catholic schoolboys in the back of they're doing something nice, right? And there's an element of that, they come back and they say something mean about Nazis and Krauts, right? As it's translated for us. And one of the Nazi soldiers says, "Can the Krauts have their blanket back?" Right. So you're, I mean, they live very much, and we see very little really of their teachers and parents. I mean, they sort of come in and out of scenes here and there, but it's really a movie about these boys, right? The two main characters, but all the other boys too, and they're squabbling and stuff, which seems very natural to me, So as compared to, we were talking about how much Hollywood was in the story of Anne Frank last week and how unnatural it seems in a way. This movie is the opposite of that, right? These boys are very naturally boys, which means
when they get the
one second and then invite somebody to lunch the next.
Right. When they get the packages from home,
yeah,
and that goes on the black market. I mean, that's
right. And they're trading for marbles and
jam
stamps, and I mean, this is a black market that's not like the adult black market, right? I mean, it's and the way they ogle pictures of girls and things like that, it's very naturalistic, let's say, and certainly true, I think, to the time period and to Louis Malle is remembering his childhood experience, maybe sugarcoating it a bit here and there. Maybe things were a little more painful and a little more hateful than he remembers them. But but still, they're just they're boys, mostly just being boys.
Yeah, you know what? On the comment about the boys not being afraid climbing rocks, that absolutely is all part. I mean, obviously, you probably didn't have any experience with boys, but boys do that stuff and they run around and they're not afraid. That's all part of their natural growing up period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When they were in the woods, they were like, "Are there any wolves around here?" I mean, they weren't thinking about the Germans or whatever. They're thinking about boy things.
That's right. That was their fear in the woods. And then, of course, the next day, they're already exaggerating their fears, right? We heard you saw wild boars. They saw one. So, yeah, there were 50 of them. And is it true that the Nazis shot at you? Yes, well, a little, something like that, right? So very rambunctious and devil may care, right?
Okay, turn it off.
I think it's quite an interesting picture, and it gradually accrues this weight as it goes on, as these boys who start out being loosely antagonistic, but no more than they are with any other. When he introduces himself to them, he says something like, let me see if I can find my note. He gives his name and then says, "And don't mess with me," right? Something like that. "Don't mess with me or you'll be sorry." And eventually they become friends, right? So
we have Alice and then Elaine.
Yeah, I was just going to say, of course, I did not see the Louis Malle movie, but thank you, Vanessa, for sending the clips. I saw those and I read about it. And it just comparing it to Anne Frank, I mean, what a different thing. One was a memory of the creator of the movie, and the other was, recreation by Hollywood of, the words of Anne Frank. So I just feel like they obviously would be very different. And also, as you said, Rabbi, the times they were made, 1959 to 1987, but they would turn out to be so different because Louis Malle lived this. I mean, so yes, so that would be, and then, you know, the creators of the Anne Frank, yes, it was based on her words, but they took such liberties, I think, with her words.
Yeah, well, and you know, while the Diary of Anne Frank is a contemporary document of things that she saw and felt and did, this is a reverie. This is, you know, I'm remembering what it was like when I was a boy. And there's a huge difference between those two things in terms of the source material itself. And then, of course, you know, translated through Hollywood, the movie making business, right? Which is nobody makes a movie to lose money. I mean, that's never the intention, right? I mean, there are some people who will say this will make enough money, right? But it's very rare. I mean, you know, in modern times, we can look at Steven Spielberg, who made Schindler's List and didn't really expect it to be popular. It was much more popular than he expected it to be. He had made so much money on everything else that he felt like, well, you know, this industry owes me the right to make this movie, in a sense, and he made it. We'll see another Spielberg movie. Is that next week or the week after? The Fabelmans.
Next week.
Next week is the Fabelmans. So, you know, again, I don't. Spielberg didn't make the Fabelmans expecting it to make money like Jaws makes money, but he didn't expect it to lose money, and I don't think it did lose money. I think because it had Steven Spielberg's name attached to it, and because he made it more cheaply than his epic adventure movies, you know, it made back its investment and a little bit more. But by and large, all movies, wherever they're made, are made with the intention of enticing people to see them. Perhaps, maybe for some people, that's the very top of the list. The next close behind, though, is at least making back all the money that was invested in it and a profit for everybody who's involved, right? So nobody starts out to, let's make a movie that nobody wants to see, right?
Yeah.
So that means certain compromises get made all the time, right? You know, in the Diary of Anne Frank, it's compromises about casting, and it's about sort of universalizing the experience and things like that. A little less so in a movie like this because it was small and made inexpensively, and no one expected it to make a fortune. But it's what folks in Hollywood would call a prestige movie, right? So somebody gets to say, we are a thinking person's studio by releasing this, right? And that goodwill leads to ticket sales and other kinds of things are involved too. And the fact that these things are meant to be commerce doesn't mean they can't also be art and can't be beautiful and can't be remarkable storytelling. And that's what I think we see here. A director with really sort of full control of all of the movie making apparatus. And I would say in some ways different to the movies we watched about the bar mitzvah experience in America. I don't feel the sense of mastery that either of those directors have that Louis Malle has, right? For how to use cameras. And you know, I think in some sense, some of those lighter comedies will just throw things against the wall and see if they stick in terms of technique, right? And here technique is really powerful. There are a couple of remarkable pieces just of movie making. I mean, forget the story and everything else. When Quentin is running through the forest in that sort of color war, capture the flag kind of game that the boys are playing out in the woods. I mean, that's a great piece of camera work, which goes from I don't even know what kind of camera that is. Is that a steady cam? Is that a tracking shot? It's a remarkable piece of camera work, just him running through the forest, which switches to an overhead crane shot of him as he's scrambling up the rocks and then scrambling back down the rocks. So you get kind of a bird's eye view of him. It's really a great piece of filmmaking. So there's nothing like it, and there couldn't be in Anne Frank. I mean, I think the director of Anne Frank has remarkable command of what he's doing, but that's all in the editing. This movie, it's in the cinematography as well. It's really quite lovely, and the whole movie has this sort of gauzy sheen to it that as if it's a dream in a certain sense, right? It's a lot of kind of soft focus all through it, which is all part of the technique. Very, very nice. So
Yeah.
Elaine?
Yeah, I have a couple comments. The locker room scene where the boys are going to go swimming. We were sure they were gonna find that he had been circumcised at that point because they're all changing their clothes, but it didn't happen. We watched the French version with subtitles. Did anybody find an English version? No.
Well, it's only with subtitles.
Okay.
So that scene, one of the things about it is, right, boys at that age are not really anxious to be naked in front of each other.
Yeah.
So that's part of it, right? They're all going off to the showers, and they're each still in their shorts. They're not going to take those shorts off until they get into their individual shower or bath, whatever it is, right? So I think it's very true to the experience of teenage boys in some sense. Sue?
Yeah, so I noticed that also, just certainly that they would discover, that the boys had been circumcised. Had it been in this country at that time, almost all kids were circumcised, no matter what their religion was. But I think that wasn't true in Europe.
No, definitely not.
And the other question I have,
a different movie about the Holocaust, right? The movie.
So the other question,
I was just going to say that's a very graphic scene that I've never been able to forget.
Yeah.
The other question that I have is when Julian wakes up in the middle of the night like he's wet his bed, and that happens a couple of times, and he talks about having had a dream.
Yeah.
And so it was probably a wet dream or nocturnal emission, whatever we want to call it, except it was such a huge stain that was he actually wetting the bed?
Yeah, I believe he was. Is it an important detail in the movie? Not so much, really. I mean, I don't think he's doing it because of trauma or something like that, which sometimes is a reaction to trauma. But he explains it to this is part of their friendship growing, is that he can actually explain it. He says, he has a dream that he's going to the bathroom, and he wakes up and he did, right? And that's what he said, and that actually does happen. So I think it's very plausible, and certainly there are children who have bedwetting issues. Most people get over that early in life, but not everybody. So and then it's part of the teasing that goes on. Everybody starts calling him a bedwetter and all that kind of stuff, right? So it's just it's part of what makes this movie realistic compared to an Anne Frank movie, for example. We're talking about it looks like nobody's gone without a shower in that Anne Frank house, in the movie that we saw, right? In this movie, they're filthy little animals, these kids pretty much. So they get taken to the bathhouse. I think, Elaine, you said they were going swimming. They're not going swimming. They're going to a place where they can actually take a bath or a shower. They probably took them there maybe once a week, right? So they have sinks in their school, but apparently not baths and showers. So they're going to the public bathhouse to get a bath and a shower. So
Hubie.
Okay, two things. One, Rabbi's comment about no one makes a movie to lose money. Wasn't there a movie they made a joke of it? It's like springtime in Germany or something. Wasn't that a joke? They tried to make
Producer.
a joke. I mean, that's a joke in the movie The Producers, the
Yeah.
Mel Brooks movie, right? That they sell 1,000% of the cost of the production because no one cares how much a flop costs, right? Because
Right.
everybody invests in a flop, and then I lost my investment. It was a flop. Their problem is that they try to make the worst play ever made, Springtime for Hitler, a musical, and it becomes a huge hit. And now they have to pay off their, the people who've been their investors. And it's impossible to pay off 1,000% of your production, right? So that's the story of that. That's a very funny movie. We haven't watched. Have we watched that one as a
I don't
Jewish?
think so.
I don't know that we have.
Heil me.
Yeah, I mean it's one of the funniest movies I think ever. So The Producers, the original movie was Zero Mostel and Gene Wilder. There was of course a Broadway musical, also by Mel Brooks, with Nathan Lane and Ferris Bueller. What's his name? Matthew Broderick.
Matthew Broderick.
Yeah, right. So, it was also equally funny, if not more. So, but yeah, so that's the problem. They set out to make a flop, but generally speaking, I can't think of any movie maker who deliberately sets out to make a flop. Even bad movie makers. I mean, there was you may remember the movie that Ed Wood, about one of the famously bad movie directors, a guy who universally, people say if there's a list of the worst movies ever made, Ed Wood's movie Plan 9 from Outer Space is usually at the top of the list, right? But he was he may have been a bit crazy and all that stuff, but he had these delusions that people would want to see his movies and that they would make money. It wasn't his intention not to, but the synapses are not firing so fast. The guy who directed the movie about that movie director, Ed Wood, Johnny Depp playing the role. I mean, that movie made a lot of money actually about the movie maker Ed Wood. So, and his movies are pretty terrible. When I was in college, I was part of a film society at the University of Wisconsin. There were films being shown on campus all over the place in those days. For $1, you could go see a movie. And we decided to do a film festival of the worst movies ever. And admission was free, but it cost $1 to leave. And we showed Plan 9 from Outer Space, which is terrible. Maybe not the worst movie I've ever seen. I mean, I would the Terror of Tiny Town, which is an all-midget Western musical, I would say is probably the worst movie I've ever seen. That was in that series as well. So there is definitely an art to bad movies, though, that they hold some interest of their own. Right? And movie makers in Hollywood can't resist making movies about the bad movies that have been made. There's a movie, oh gosh, what's that called? The bad movie was called The Room. And there's a movie about the guys making The Room, which is very funny, actually. And but The Room is now didn't exist. It hadn't been made yet when I was in college, but it's on the more recent list of the worst movies ever made, I think. So what else can we say about this film? So a couple of none of the actors are people we are really familiar with. Several of them have had careers mostly in France. The boy who plays the Jewish boy, Bonnet, actually is a director himself in France these days. So he's made some movies of his own. So he learned something of the craft from watching Louis Malle in this movie, I think, and now writes and directs his own movies.
Rabbi, is he really Jewish?
I don't think so.
His,
So
his name
that's
is
the
Raphael Feito.
yeah.
Oh, wait a minute. Oh, wait. Oh, okay. Here he is. One of them had a Jewish ancestry. I don't remember if it was him or Louis Malle.
So I don't think it's not Louis Malle.
Maybe
Although
it's him then.
there is a line in the movie, when he's out to lunch with his mother, where aren't we Jewish?
Right.
And she tells him no. He says, well, what about Aunt so and so? So and gets a little bit brushed off there. So I don't
Right.
know if we're supposed to think that the character may or may not have had a Jewish relative somewhere.
So this
his mother-
Feito is of Russian, Egyptian, Jewish, and Lebanese ancestry.
Okay. Very nice. Thank you. The actress who plays the mother has been married to Donald Sutherland, I think since 1972 or something like that. So they must have met in probably in France, actually. Donald Sutherland at that point, shortly after making MASH and things, has made several movies in Europe. So they probably ran across each other there. So it's sort of an interesting tidbit. It's one of the other the actor who plays let's see, I think plays the older brother, Francois Quinton in this movie, showed up recently. He won an Oscar, having been the co-writer of the movie Coda, Children of Deaf Adults, that won the Best Picture Oscar a couple of years ago. So Stanislas Carré de Malberg, which is a bit of a mouthful, but he's a co-writer of the screenplay of Coda. So kind of remarkable, to see that pop up as I was looking up some of these folks. So so it's really in saying a worthwhile film to try and seek out. If you get a chance, keep looking. There are, I'm sure if any of you still have DVD players, I'm sure there's a DVD at the Highland Park Library and probably some other spots where you could track it down. It's really a coming of age story. It's a story of lost innocence in a way. There's a moment of betrayal near the end of the movie that's very subtle, when the Gestapo comes in and is looking to see. They come in, they know there's a Jewish boy in the classroom, and they don't know which one it is, and his friend gives sort of a quick furtive look at him, and that cues in the Gestapo to which one it is. And so that momentary act is something that, at least in the story of this movie, haunts him for the rest of his life. Right? He's certainly not the informer who told the Gestapo that there were Jews in the school, but that look is something that is difficult for him to think about. And I will say that Louis Malle says that he invented that moment for this movie, that was not part of his experience as a childhood in the school. But but I think it's open to some interpretation, perhaps. But the last lines in the movie are not the very last. I mean, but the priest being arrested and being sent off to Mauthausen says, "Goodbye, children. Au revoir les enfants." And I think in some ways you could interpret that as goodbye childhood, right? That, you know, all of the sort of innocent shenanigans that have gone up and on up until kind of this tragic conclusion, you know, are child's play, and now they're all men, right? It's no going back from that. And the last lines are spoken out loud. I believe Louis Malle is the one who says them. You know, so spoken by him as an adult. This is, "The school reopened in October of 1944, but I'll remember every second of that January morning until the day I die." So, so that's Au Revoir Les Enfants. So, track it down if you can. It's definitely worth it. It's certainly, you know, this group of movies that we put together this time, I'd say, not all of them really fit my definition of what a real Jewish classic ought to be. I think this one does, you know, in many, many ways. So thanks, everybody. Next week's movie should be easier to find.
It's on Prime Video.
Okay. So
and just in the theater world, Norman Lear passed today.
oh
Mhm.
my
Oh,
goodness.
Yes,
it was
101.
101.
Yeah.
So-
This is if you're a 100-year-old Jew, this is a bad week.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Why?
right.
Who else died?
Oh, Kissinger was last week.
Oh, Kissinger.
Yeah.
Another 100-year-old Jew.
Yeah.
Very different from Norman Lear.
Yeah. Lahavdil.
Well,
I,
actually, if you're interested in these things, if you don't watch The Daily Show, if you can find the episode where they have a sports debate about America's greatest war criminal from last week, it's pretty remarkable. It's pretty remarkable.
It's hilarious.
Yeah.
wait, I have a quick question before we go, related, but not exactly. So I've read fiction. I've seen probably other movies about France during the war, but I've never really read the history. I know it's a very complicated history. I was just wondering if anybody had like a good recommendation of something. Well, I just finished watching All the Light We Cannot See, which is, oh my God, unbelievable. But I just want to know more, you know, rather than just like picking up stuff in fiction and movies. If anybody has a good book about France during World War II.
I will tell you that if you just saw the movie, the series, All the Light You
Oh,
Cannot
I read
See.
it.
Did you read the
Oh,
book?
I read it. It's
Because
one of
I
my
think the
all-time
book is
favorite
far
books.
better. I
It's
think
one
the
of my
book is,
all-time favorite books.
yeah,
Oh yeah,
the
no,
book
I
is
read
much
it.
better than the series.
But it's still fiction. I want to know. It's fiction.
Right.
It was came out of Door's
Right.
head. I want to read more. I mean, I had contact once with a woman who survived, you know, the Holocaust in France, but you know, again, that was just like a personal thing that I heard her story, but I just would love to know more. I'll look it up. If I find anything,
I'll try to think of something. A particular book devoted specifically to that subject doesn't jump to mind.
I mean, I've been to France and to all those World War II places and everything. And you probably know the story about my family and us going to retrieve a watch that my husband's cousin lost when he was shot down after D-Day. in France? Do you know that, Alice,
I-
that story? Rabbi, well, you.
I don't know.
No, when we used to do personal expressions here, they had me talk about it because we took our whole family to pick up this watch that was found in a field in Normandy. And it's engraved on the back, which is how they finally found our family. And my husband's cousin was a pilot flying out of England. It was after D-Day, and he was flying over Normandy, and he was shot down by the Nazis, and he was killed. And then they took us, when we went to get the watch, they took us to the site where his plane went down. It was just the most incredible experience I've ever had. So we did learn a lot about France and the Nazis and everything during World War II, but I can't tell you that I know a book
Yeah.
that I could recommend.
Alice, I'm going to send you some. The Paris architect, Gillian Cantor has some, the muralist, and just,
Are those
the
all
other one.
novels?
They're all but Vanessa, what
Yeah.
I'm looking for
So,
is
there-
his,
so there's a
I-
book called, I think it's literally called Jews in France during World War II.
oh, that would be good.
Oh, you want a nonfiction book?
I
Yeah.
wanted
Yeah.
nonfiction, yeah. Yeah, because
want
I
that?
read a lot of fiction
Yeah,
about
right.
that.
You
Been a
want a
lot of-
history book.
So I had to think about it, but Jews in France during World War II.
Okay.
The author might be, I'm not sure how to spell it, Poznansky, I think.
Okay.
I mean, the
Thank
other one, which is about Germany, but in the Garden of Beasts, Love, Terror, and an American Family in Hitler's Berlin.
Oh, I
Right.
read that.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
a
Yeah,
good.
that's
I've read
Eric
a lot.
Larson,
I've read
right?
a lot of
Yeah.
fiction about World War II, but I especially France, I feel like I know that there was the occupation. I know people went south, but I kind of don't know how the whole thing.
Right,
You know,
so there
happened.
was for a while, there was a part of France, didn't this, we covered this in one of our other movies, I think, that we had some.
Vichy France, okay.
There was
Uh,
Vichy France, yeah.
Yeah.
How
But-
about?
I got one. I
There
got
was
one
some
for
people
you.
who got down to Marseille. I can't remember what movie that was.
You-
No,
Yubi,
no.
you've got one?
Yeah,
Yeah, if you want to read a book, it's by Jackson, and it's got France, the Dark Years, 1940 to 1944.
Oh, by Jackson?
Yeah, but not necessarily about Jews, but it's about
Okay.
about France in those years.
Thank you.
looks like Neil either has a book.
Yes,
or-
Neil.
Yeah,
The
there's a classic,
Sorrow and the Pity.
yeah, it's a classic
Oh,
documentary.
yeah,
It was about 8 hours. I believe it was from the 90s, maybe the 80s. And it kind of highlighted the French that collaborated. And it
Oh,
it's
caused
actually even
the
a little
French-
earlier, Neil, I think.
It caused the French to re-examine the myth that they were perpetrating,
Yeah,
that the average Frenchman was in the resistance and fought the Nazis. I'm sure you can pick it up anywhere.
thank you.
that's a
Thank-
great recommendation.
Right,
Mike's
and it's from
Opal.
1969.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm
in,
okay.
old, I forget these things.
among other things, in the movie Annie Hall, Alvy Singer's first date with Annie Hall, he takes her to a screening of The Sorrow and the Pity. And
Oh,
so,
Of course.
right, and that movie's from 1977, so I knew it had to
Thank
be.
you,
older
thank
than
you.
that.
Yeah.
But the director of it is Max Ophuls, Ophuls, if memory.
thank you. That's a good
Yeah.
recommendation.
Yeah,
It's-
that's an excellent one to look up. Yeah.
Thank you all.
Just-
I want to come
Just
back
a bit
to,
of
Last word?
trivia. Just a bit of trivia. Louis Malls was married to Candace Bergen.
Candace Bergen.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, so his brother-in-law was Charlie McCarthy.
Ah,
I want to come back to some of his opening remarks about both of these movies where these guys were killed at the end of the world, 1944.
Yeah.
And there's a parallel here that's very disturbing. In other words, what happened, the Nazis just didn't let up. The war was over, they were in trouble, but they insisted on killing Jews. And we have a problem in this country. There's a message here that there's some real sick people and they don't let up. And that's very scary.
Yeah, look, there's an argument to be made that had they not been so fixated on killing Jews, they might have won the war, which is kind of scary too. Either way you look at it, it's scary. But you know, it's really tragic. I mean, tragic from beginning to end, but you know, to be the last one to die, you know, or to die as this priest did a few days after the concentration camp was liberated, you know, just adds this level of irony to it that makes it even sadder, I guess. So anyway, thank you very much for the discussion. It's good to see you all. So,
Rabbi.
next week, Steven Spielberg. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.